Okay, good.
How long is the
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to IYC 12 Youth Solutions for a Changing World. My name is Nina Borjanadze, and I am a communications associate here at International Organization of Youth. A little bit about me: I just graduated from Adelphi University with a major in political science. Thank you. I was a youth representative when I was 19 years old for Adelphi University, and this is how I got involved with IYC, and I'm very happy to be here to moderate this incredible session, Policy in Motion, Youth Driving Global Advocacy and Leadership. Today's session highlights something truly powerful: the ability of young people to shape the policies that govern our communities, nations, and the world. We're not just talking about the future leaders, we're talking about the current change makers, and I'm very happy to have all of you here. Our incredible panelists have already did an incredible work in their own respective fields, and they also represent a very diverse background. So let's just start with a little bit of introduction. Here is Eugenia Pozas Frankenberg. She's a master's candidate of negotiation and conflict resolution from Columbia University. She is also a Mexican lawyer and she just recently published a book that I'm sure she will talk to us about. She currently serves as a content creator and coordinator at KIC Consultores, a consulting firm that improves employee experience and engagement. She's a published author, as I've mentioned, to the book Castaways. Her love for the arts and literature often fuses with her drive to volunteer and act, as she has brought poetry and storytelling to prisons and pro-libertarian movements. So thank you for all your work. Next, we have Jagrati Goyal. She's an investment professional with 6 years of experience in sustainable finance, impact investing, and policy. She is currently an investment associate at Flat World Partners and recently earned her master's from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs. And congratulations. During her master's, she advised Citi on climate risk underwriting for $7 billion affordable housing portfolio and contributed to AI and trade policy for the G7 governments at the Tony Blair Institute in London. Prior to New York, she worked as an investment banker at Unitus Capital in Bangalore. Great resume, and thank you for being here. And lastly, we have Max Genning, Youth Advisor to the Office of the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights. He is a Ukraine-Canadian international lawyer and development leader working at the intersection of human rights, youth policy, and inclusive governance. He's also an appointed youth advisor He's also a global advocate, co-sponsor supporting the UN Youth Rights Academy and represents the OHCHR on the UN Interagency Working Group on Youth. In his role, he steers youth policy and member state commitments under the UN Youth Office. Max is also the North America chair of the UN SDSN Global MDP Association, leading youth-driven SDG projects in 24 countries. Thank you for being here. I mean, you have an incredible bio that it's even hard to read and pronounce some words.
You got it.
Yes. I would love to start the panel with more personal questions and just learn about you and your perspectives on this really important topic. So why don't you just start with your brief introduction and share the recent projects that you've been working on lately. So we'll start with Eugenia right here. So you will have around 2 to 5 minutes.
All right.
To your introduction.
You will stop me when I
Yes,
stop
for
me.
sure. Yes.
Okay,
I will
perfect.
show you this. So this means that you have like short time to left and you can wrap it up.
Perfect. Well, my name is Eugenia, and as Nino mentioned, I graduated from law school in Monterrey, Mexico, where I was born and raised. And there, I've been really involved during my studies and after my studies with a lot of activist groups there in Monterrey. Monterrey is an industrial city and a growing city too. So there's a lot of things that must be done there in that city, especially when it comes to climate change and combating air pollution. So that's where I've mostly focused my work right now, but I've also been involved in a lot of topics that relate to gender violence, because I don't know if you know this, but Mexico has one of the biggest incidences of violence against women globally. So that is where a lot of my activism came from when I was an undergraduate. Then I began to really get involved in the literature and art community because, as well, Monterrey being an industrial city, I wanted to promote the cultural aspects of the city and to really showcase that there are poets and artists there as well, not just workers in factories or workers in corporate jobs. So for me, the most important thing is to combine the arts and literature with everything we do as policymakers and change makers. So I have this dual personality where I'm very interested in the law and the public sphere, but I'm also very interested in promoting the arts and literature. So I've been wondering, how do we bring this literature and art and poetry to those spaces that need it most, specifically vulnerable communities? And such as prisons or orphanages or migrant shelters. So I've begun to do a little bit of this through prison and bringing poetry to prisoners. Specifically, a project I did last August was bringing poetry workshops to female who were incarcerated so the incarcerated communities, and that's my ongoing project. And I'm also studying conflict resolution at Columbia, so that's the most important thing for me right now.
Thank you so much for sharing your work and sharing how your background also inspired you to continue your activism and also, combine arts with policymaking. And, you mentioned going to a female prison, and that also resonated with me because I grew up as a dancer and I actually danced in a female prison when I was in Morocco when I was 10. So I think it's a really beautiful way, using art and using culture and using storytelling as well to really resonate with people, especially those people who really need it the most. So thank you for your work. It's incredible. Jakarta, now I will give you the panel and the floor. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. I spent a lot of time working in impact investing in the capacity as of an advisor. So that previously I was usually entailed working with founders, helping them raise capital. Typically we would work with founders and we would support underserved communities so that capital could reach those areas where there was a lack of, financial support. So I've worked a lot with microfinance institutions, done a lot of worked a lot in financial inclusion, and also spent a lot of time in DEI and climate. So that's what I would do when I was working in India, working with emerging economies, and that is what led me to pursue a master's in policy and finance, because I think that policy is instrumental in supporting these emerging areas. So without effective policy, policy is really the backbone to ensure that capital reaches different communities. So that's how I became curious about this space. I learned more about it, learned from great people, met some inspiring thought leaders in this area. I also had a chance to work closely with the Tony Blair Institute in London as a policy researcher. So I would spend a lot of time doing AI and trade policy work there. And now I am working with Flat World Partners, as you mentioned, in investments. So we work in DEI or climate and support capital so that it can support enabling capital reaching meaningful areas. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And one part really resonated with me when you talked about, creating, basically giving underserved communities capital and also working in the microfinance sector. Economic incentives, in my opinion, are necessary to build up communities. So your work, definitely was very influential, I'm sure. So thank you for your continued work. Now, Max, I will give you the floor. Please do a little brief introduction and share some of the projects that you've been working on, especially in this climate when, yes, young people are giving opportunities, but it's also very hard for those voices and those young people to have actually real impact. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that we have this opportunity. I appreciate hearing from both of you. My work started, I grew up in a conflict background, and my work started there because I saw inequities around me all the time. And when I moved to Canada, Canada has the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They are one of the countries that's leading in that aspect. They've had it for many, many years, and that entrenches fundamental rights for Canadians, for all communities, and a lot of intersectionalities there. So I found that very puzzling. I found that very unique and novel and amazing that the Canadians can rely on such a codified piece of legislation that's in the Constitution now to protect them. And so I started getting involved in any aspect I could that could protect communities in our own communities. I got involved with something called the Together Project. I was part of the inaugural group. This happened post the Arab Spring, and we supported people that were settling as refugee or asylum claimants in Canada to integrate and assimilate into Canadian culture, coming from very, war-torn, conflict-affected backgrounds. Thereafter, obviously, I pursued a bunch of studies. A part of that motivated my studies into law school and into development work. So I started getting into development work. I was a development practitioner with the government of Canada for many years, and I focused on running development programs in the Global South primarily. However, around that same time, I started getting involved in youth work because this wasn't something that I was privy to, that youth are leading, or in Canada especially, we don't have such a large ecosystem of youth leads as you have in other countries, for whatever reason, I don't know. And so I started noticing there were opportunities. So we set a youth committee up with one of the key humanitarian organizations called Good Neighbors. They provide a lot of support globally, and I was their advocacy lead. So my role was to push all the advocacy efforts, get grant funding from our government, and we ran 2 very successful campaigns to support women's and girls' education in Bangladesh and Myanmar. And after that, I continued doing a lot of work in many different spaces, primarily in education. I mentored refugees to try to get into top educational institutions for many years. I continue to do that now. And then I started getting into the legal work, which brought me into the Human Rights Office and my appointment there. And that work has been very eye-opening. Of course, we heard from another panelist today that there's a difference between CSOs and large institutions and their resource mobilization capacities. Sometimes you have institutions that are able to provide more money, and some people have to confront the fact that they're not going to be able to do as much because they have a natural limitation. Thankfully, the Human Rights Office does have the possibility to do so. However, because of the UN Youth Envoy and a new mandate on Youth 2030, they've reallocated those leadership responsibilities to youth. So it's like they act as a convener, but then gather youth around the world to drive action and impact forward. In that vein, in 2021, they set a partnership with an organization called Silatech, an Education Above All Foundation. It was under the Qatari government. All those 3 partners came together to form together a resource toolkit that would go out to all the countries with a particular mandate on Palestine, Colombia, and South Africa as key target areas that needed a lot of focus on them. That then devolved into first Youth Rights Advisory Board. This was the first such initiative they did. And this is also at the time where around COVID, a lot of them started popping up. Then that turned into what we call a microsite through a youth empowerment system. So it's an online-based resource website that's live now. It's called youth4yes.com. That came through a very large resource mobilization of thousands of young people, including a lot of CSOs, a lot of consultations. And that has given young people a lot of opportunity to go drive change in their own communities where otherwise they may not have access to spaces or may not have had the know-how beforehand. And that then was re-extended 2 years ago into the board that I'm on and the role that I serve. And our mandate was to continue driving that work internationally, part of which was to develop an advocacy and action portion on our website, which spotlights individuals that have already made impact around the world and gives them the opportunity to be spotlighted by the UN and go out to a global audience. In addition, we hosted an academy this past July. We brought together over 50 young leaders from a pool of 6,000 that are making a lot of change from over 40 different countries. And this year, after that academy is finished, we have now mandated that everybody that has attended now has to implement those human rights projects that they ideated for the next year or so. We'll reconvene next year. And I've had this opportunity, and it's a lot has come with it. You mentioned in my bio, I work with the UN Youth Office. I sit on the PACT Working Group for Youth Implementation. As you know, the Summit of the Future member states signed the Pact for the Future, and Chapter 4 is based on youth. in that commitment, there is a series of programs and implementation that they have to attribute to. And I sit on the one that drives the entire youth working group. And so currently we're taking very much effect, taking the advocacy portion into policy and driving it. And you've seen that, as another panelist said this morning, sometimes it's very difficult to make it palatable or incentivizing to member states or people in positions of power that youth can drive change. Youth are capable, they have expertise and competency. So we continue doing the best that we can. And I certainly continue doing that work as well. And yeah, that's me.
Oh my God, thank you so much. You've made so many incredible points, and your bio is absolutely inspiring. And thank you for all the work that you do. I resonate with the beginning part of coming with the background, of witnessing conflict in your own country, because I also come from Georgia, so I witnessed the war when I was 5. So I think the way our backgrounds shapes our outlook on life and policy making and diplomacy and just peacemaking is beautiful. And thank you, all of you, for your work. It's amazing. Now to ask more personal questions about the work that you're doing currently. Eugenia, as I've mentioned a couple of times, you just recently published a book, and I would love to learn more about that. Could you please share how particularly you've used poetry and storytelling to influence and impact social change? And can you give us an example of what were some of the successful projects that you've done using your own poetry and book and storytelling?
Yes, of course. As I said, with my dual personality, I am a poet, and I love to write creatively. I've done it ever since I was 9 years old. And poetry has always been a constant in my life, both reading it and writing it. So I wanted to, first of all, publish what I was writing, because I didn't want all of my work to be just stuck in a drawer for the rest of my life. So I published the book, the first poetry book, because I'm sure my intention is to write and publish more. It's called Náufragos in Spanish, but it's translated to Castaways. Which talks about, the poetry book talks about how most of us are feeling lost in the world, and we are like castaways wrapped up in the ocean, in the darkness, trying to find lighthouses nearby that guide us through. So it's a metaphor for light and darkness, and how there's both of these aspects in our lives. Of course, there will be a lot of conflict, a lot of war, and that's the darkness part of existence. But then the light side of it is art, poetry, family, friends, and love. So the poetry book is a very existential one. I published it in 2022, and since then I've enjoyed doing a lot of book tours and talking about my book. But in between the publishing and now, I started to realize that I wanted to do something more with the book, not just publish it and having readers and people read it, but to use it as a sort of a vehicle for storytelling in dark places. For example, I've brought the book, as I've mentioned, to prisons, where I've reworked the main poem, which is called Náufragos, with people inside this prison facilities, and what they interpret a castaway to be, how they feel about finding the light in the darkness. And I think most of the change that has to occur is emotional. It first starts from the inside, so poetry helps a lot with that. I've also brought poetry and storytelling to orphanages, specifically orphanages that have children there that have suffered so much and that come from a background of abuse. Mm-hmm. And there, the storytelling and especially fairy tales have served a lot of purpose in them figuring out who they are. So this is the thing with my book, and with everything I write, I want to use it as a source of light through the darkness, as a metaphor of Náufragos was.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's incredible. I personally truly believe in the power of storytelling, and also the fact that it can connect one person from this country to another person from that country, and just kind of creating that global understanding of humanity in a way. Because, I mean, for example, music, I mean, you might not even understand what they're singing about, but that sense of community comes from arts. And I think what you're doing is incredible, and I'm sure you will do way more with your book, and I wish you the best of luck. Okay, now let's go to Jabrati. I mean, your whole bio is incredible, but I would like to more about sustainable finance and policymaking. And I want to know, how do you think young people who might not have the traditional understanding of sustainable finance or have an ability to access high quality education, how can those type of young people can first get educated and have access to really good information, and then use that education to create change and policy change in their own local communities and then national agenda?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that the best way to bring about any change is to take action. A lot of times people believe that policy is about experience, but I think that it's also about perspective. And I think that once you, supposing, you decide that you are passionate about a cause and you want to work towards it, create a real solution, implement it, scale it, I think that when you start working towards it, you will find certain gaps. You will definitely find gaps in policy, that even if there can be favorable policy in the space that you're working in, but there will be like some hindrance or a gap or some kind of gray area that needs more clarity, or you need, or maybe there is like a lack of policy in that space. So you would have to then like lobby, maybe work with activists, work with politicians, and that's when you involve all kinds of stakeholders. You involve even the people who would be maybe your customers to maybe like sign petitions, create some kind of like create awareness, launch campaigns. And this is something that I have personally seen, having worked with a lot of founders in this space of like impact investing. A lot of times people set out to maybe, launch these amazing projects, but realize that they need some kind of policy support, whether it's in the form of how do you price biofuels versus like gas, how do you like compete with the lower prices that maybe gas offers versus biofuel, and then there needs to be like some kind of policy support that comes in so that people are incentivized to also purchase biofuels, like naturally occurring bio CNG and stuff like that. So I think that I think that it's just about like having that bias for action, starting something, and then keep problem solving and engaging your community, engaging all stakeholders and working together. I think that when people come together, it's always stronger than fighting alone.
Absolutely. I really liked your point about finding the gaps in policy, because I think a lot of young activists and change makers do find those gaps in the policy in their own respective countries and nations. But it's really hard to translate their findings into real action. And I think that's also a good way to transition into my next question that I'm going to ask Max. You mentioned that you were part of the youth committee, right, in Canada, where you advocated for from the government to get funding to support the refugees. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know, how was that process for you? Because sometimes it's really hard to get that approval or support from the government. And could you please tell us about that experience and maybe give us some advice for those young people who are finding those gaps but do not really know how to translate those gaps into the real action?
Well, I want to echo what Jagrati just said, is that when you start approaching a problem, you do realize its gaps.
Right.
You realize where there's a bunch of issues, where perhaps there are things you didn't know, whether it's internal bureaucracy or politics, whether it's something ideological that you're broaching that you shouldn't be, or also whether there's just things that are administrative or that you could fill the gap or maybe you need resources to. So I think the more you dig deeper into something, you uncover all of the problems of why other people haven't, or past generations haven't broached it. And that precisely happened to me. And when you try to, at least from the government standpoint, when you try to apply for any sort of funding, usually government funding, I can only speak for Canada, but government funding tends to be on a tender basis. So a department will open it up for a specific tender, whether it's a program in a particular department, a theme or objective they're trying to achieve within their federal budgets, or overall program of whoever the state leader is. And based on that, different organizations will put tenders forward, like their own propositions on how they would like that money allocated from a giant pool. That's precisely what we did. And our unique spin was that it was youth-led, because oftentimes you're competing with other CSOs, but that are much larger or that have a lot more institutional capacity than you do. So you do bring, and I want all the youth to know this, you do bring something very unique and valuable, especially if youth are not engaged at a member state level. And although some people could see that as a deterrent or something that it would be a problem that, they'll be pushed away, that's actually your unique value add in propositioning yourself. Additionally, when it comes to the UN system as a whole, a lot of youth, especially watching this, may be curious to know, how do I get involved with the UN, or, how do I position myself or my projects before the UN or UN bodies? I would say from my experience thus far, when it comes to member state delegations or any departments there, they do not like whining or people that just come to air their grievances. They want to give people the floor to say what they want and immediately follow it up with a recommendation or a solution. So it's not just you're coming into a room with people that are, at a very senior level and you're fortunate to be in that room, but then coming with no ideas or no solutions to the very thing that you are presenting about. So I tell people to come prepared, know the background of the issue that's central to whatever you're advocating for, know the people in the room and where the current space is, and know exactly what you're proposing to do and how you would like people to help you and departments to mobilize. In addition, however, knowing that you need to be a little bit realistic and pragmatic of what's possible and what timeline. People come in very deer-eyed and very excited for all change to happen, and then they get bogged down and realize that it's not how they intended it to be. It's not what they thought. Mm-hmm. And that's just because the UN is a very bureaucratic system, as we all know. And so you cannot expect that bureaucracy will move, fields and fields just for you. I say that when it comes to government grants, it's the exact same. When tenders come, be prepared to position yourself, sell your unique value add, know everything about that policy issue or area, propose it and do so. And when I had to do that with Good Neighbors, we already had many programs that were running before the time that I was there. So that was a unique value add. However, we also were a group of 12 that were very motivated, that were contributing to local communities, women and girls in education in Bangladesh and Myanmar. And we were filling a gap. That specific community hadn't seen any injections of funds or capital or supports. So we were filling that gap. In addition, we are youth-led. And that was something that the Canadian government doesn't partake in quite a lot. Most of the time it tends to run through one specific department. So that definitely narrows your pool. So when I tell young people, if you're driving anything, come prepared, be prepared to be, face up some sort of barriers or challenges, but keep going, because it's not a no is never a no until you stop trying.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that. And I think it is really similar to what Jagretti said about action-based approach. And I also think that's absolutely necessary, especially when we talk about very high level institutions like the UN. So there's a very good advice. I actually would like to ask you the same question. What would be that piece of advice that you've learned maybe in a hard way that you would like to give to other change makers who are just starting their own journey? They do want to make a change, but they don't know where to begin, or maybe they don't have enough inner strength to actually make that post or go out in the street. Like, what would be your advice? And maybe Max, you can also chime in.
Mm-hmm. Actually, what my fellow panelists have been commenting is super interesting, and it really aligns with what I've been learning in my conflict resolution program. Action is extremely important to change the world, but what we learn in the program is also that the first thing that we have to do before intervening a conflict area is to first create self-awareness. It actually surprises me how much of the program at first focused on learning about yourself, because you have to learn about yourself, how you react to certain situations, your values, what you think about the world, before you can enter a space that is in conflict, because it's you are entering with all of these beliefs that might have to be deconstructed before you enter a zone where it is needed. So that would be my advice, to really, really, like, if if there are young people out there who want to be policymakers and change makers and peacemakers, they first have to really build, like the first step, in my opinion, is to really build a strong self-awareness of who they are before they charge into the world with their ideas.
Thank you. That's a very beautiful answer, and I think also very important. You know, you have to have a very strong character, but also I think, and I would like to add on that. Yes, you have to be very confident in who you are and what your values are, but I think also you have to be very open-minded, and you have to have the mindset that, you know, yes, that person might be different from me, but that doesn't mean that they are a threat to me. So I think that openness also opens a lot of doors, especially in conflict resolution.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you, Dorothy. To you.
Yeah. When you asked this, it's a great question. When you asked this question, I was actually thinking something so similar to what my fellow panelists said. I think that it's so similar, but the way I view is that just start with being honest with yourself. And I think that once you're honest with like what's going on within you, you're able to automatically operate with a certain kind of clarity, which everyone then appreciates. It just makes things, I think, easier. I think the hardest part is being honest with yourself, and then everything lines after that. But I think another thing that I have actually learned through, I think, my experience at Columbia, I met some wonderful people, and something that I learned from my community there is how to ask for help. So many of my friends that I would meet, or my classmates, we would lean on each other in a way that it was organic. Like, I don't know, I think that when you truly feel like, you know, if this would be better if I could maybe discuss with someone, and if you ever have that thought, you should maybe just reach out to someone, and don't hesitate at that point. I think most people, I think, are really kind and are willing to help if you reach out with sincerity. So that would be like follow on to what you just said, like, I guess, like knowing yourself and like taking action, but then also like reach out to people, and I think that like you'd be met with a lot of support.
Thank you for that beautiful answer. The importance of having a community and being part of the village. You know, of course, everyone knows the phrase, it takes a village, but sometimes people don't want to be a villager. So you have to be a villager in order to get that village back and their support back when you need it. So, Max, would you like to have?
I agree with them.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with them more. I think it is about knowing yourself before you step into everything, because you have to have conviction when you are advocating for something or pushing for something, and also when you're feeling down because you didn't get the result that you wanted, or it's getting stressful, you turn inwards. Why did I do this to begin with? Why am I driving this work? Or if it's unpaid, why am I bothering myself with this? You turn inwards. And similarly so, to what Jagati said, is once you have that, you can form community. And I oftentimes find that sometimes people may think, well, I'm too introverted. I'm not the activist person that's center stage, nor do I want to be. And I don't know where to start, or it's very confronting to appeal to authority or anything like that. Like, I don't want to be there, where it's fine. You don't have to be. You can find a community that can take that for you and support their work. You could be supporting them, driving that work, but you don't have to, do everything that you don't want to. And similarly so, if that's something that people want to do, they can find the community that can push them and propel them forward and give them a nice nudge over time to get to the position that they want to be in, And it really is, it's a community type of thing. Doing things alone, you'll feel very siloed and isolated. And especially when you're looking at anything in the SDGs or very large, you can't do it alone. These are very global problems. You just can't.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I always think the same way, and I always consider myself as the lucky one, because for me, International Organization of Youth and this conference gives me that sense of community. Because you can go upstairs, or you can just go to the next room, and you will definitely find someone who shares the same values, if not the same interests, at least like the value is the same. That we want to create the future where everyone is included, everyone is safe, everyone is healthy. So I think that is also a very good way to attend the conferences, go to the meetings, go to your local meetings, talk to people, as you said, ask for help or just ask questions. Those are some of the small things that you can do that will definitely help you. For my closing question, I would basically want to ask the question that is very similar to our topic, policy in motion. What do you think, and how do you think we can see more young people in policy on local, national, and international level? I mean, you can talk about international level, and then you can talk about local level as you work with the communities, and you can talk about national level as you worked in the government in Mexico. So you can divide the local, national, and international policy making. Would you like to start?
I think that once you start working, I guess just from drawing from my experience working in finance, working with businesses, I think that as your business grows, which is like a part of like the larger ecosystem, a larger industry that contributes to the GDP. But looking at the local level, I think that the messaging is really important, and storytelling, as you mentioned previously. So I think that a lot of times when something is new at local levels, it can seem confusing or intimidating. So I think having a seat at the table, like creating like local level advocates, because change really starts from within, and maybe like having like representatives who are, who agree with your vision. I think that's like really important, because if you're trying to bring about change, but people at the local level aren't able to see that, then maybe there's some misalignment. So having like local, groups, like I don't know, like local boards, or positions, and then kind of making like having those people, like maybe like one person from each like district or community like represented. Yeah, I think that I've seen this in various different ways. In a most recent example, which is not so related, like not related with advocacy at all, but we all use DoorDash. Even DoorDash has like Dasher representatives, like all the Dashers that deliver food, and then those Dashers are represented in like a separate, like they have like a board or something, and then those messages are then communicated to the corporate level, which goes to the CEO. So I think that having that kind of representation at each point, so that each voice is heard, is really important. So yeah, I think that's how one must like look at local. I think local is the seed,
Thank you. Those are great points, especially importance of understanding the policy and the idea. I absolutely believe that you have to talk to people in their own language. I mean you have to translate the policy and be able to explain it to a 4-year-old kid or a teenager or an elderly person, and you will be talking about the same policy but in a different way, in a different angle. So I think what you've said is very, very insightful and important, and also the importance of representation. It is imperative to have representation, of course. I mean, without it, we will be excluding the people who definitely need to be heard. And young people were at some point excluded from those conversations, and now we have platforms to advocate for what we need, what we want to see in the future, and how to drive that change. So thank you so much. Eugenia, on to you.
I'm actually also going to emphasize the local
Okay, sure.
work, because I think
Yes.
it is so important. The thing about young people is that I feel like I do sense in our generation a lot of drive and a lot of interest in knowing about the world. But I feel like a lot of it, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like a lot of it focalizes like in the social media sphere. You learn a lot about what's happening in the world through social media, but often we forget to step outside and see what's happening right outside our houses or in our own communities. For example, for me, the experience of working in city government was so eye-opening. I got to really understand what the neighbors needed. I got to really know the streets, where exactly intervention needed to happen, which rivers needed cleaning up. That for me felt like it not only gave me a sense that that I was learning, it also gave me hope, because as we were enacting locally and things were getting done, it gave me hope that, well, if it gets done here, it can get done anywhere. And it's just about being being a community, being a responsible villager, as you were saying, getting involved. It is easy to be interested in what's happening globally. Well, maybe not even that easy, but it's easier to get to know what's happening globally and not really know what's happening in where you are. So for me, the first thing for young people to do is to really act local, like with a global perspective. That would be for me the
Exactly. No, though that's an incredible point. I think localizing the issue, localizing the problem is the way to go, because sometimes you hear all these problems in the world and you feel overwhelmed. I mean, I've experienced that when I was younger, but then you're like, okay, but what can I do now? What can I do where I am right now? So I think your point is incredibly on point. So now, Max, on to you, and then I'll do my closing remarks, and this session will be over. So.
I want to echo Eugenia's point, because I think it, especially from my purview, when you first try to get involved in anything at a multilateral space, it's UN. Everybody just looks to the UN immediately. And I want to remind people, like you just said, it's not the only place. There's tons of communities, rural communities that are completely forgot about by their own domestic systems, that are left to fend for themselves, that have to advocate for themselves. There's tons of at the provincial or state level, and then you continue so on and so forth. Then you go national, then you go global. You don't have to immediately go and shoot for the stars at a global level and just say, my eyes on the prize, the UN, it has to be there. I have to be top, cream of top, Oftentimes also when it comes to making about real change or really feeling it, it does come at the local level. Mm-hmm. You go to all these meetings at a global level or very internationally, you don't sense it. It's a lot of meetings. It's a lot of just emails and things back and forth, unless you're in the field. And this is also very similar to people that are interested in like humanitarian work. You can go the very institutional route and sit in an office, but you're not going to feel it, as opposed to if you're in the field. And I want to remind people that when we're looking to how to make impact on our own, or if you're shy, you can do it by yourself. We're at a conference that was started by one person. This was somebody's initiative because they had interest and they just drove it further and further, and now it's magnified 10 times over. Similarly, so when you're a young person and you're looking at everything very institutional, you're like, oh, but I'm not going to be taken serious, or I have nothing to add, or I don't have competency or experience. Some of those things may be true, that you may lack the experience or the expertise in an area. You can work towards that. However, that doesn't mean that you can't be the person that emails whoever your representative is, your local office, goes up to a corporate company for sponsorship. You have to take initiative and action to drive change. You can't sit there idly and expect that somebody will invite you in. You have to be about the change. And when you reflect that change doesn't have to be at an international level. It could be at a community level, which means you can walk outside your door right now, walk a few steps to your nearest office, wherever it may be, and you can talk to those individuals and say, I want to get involved. How can I get involved? Whatever it is that interests you, and that's where you start. That's essentially where you start. You don't start sitting on your room and watching these things and then doing nothing about it. Exactly. But you watch this and then you go straight out that door.
Exactly. That's I think a beautiful way to end this incredible session. I am incredibly honored to have moderated this session. I've learned so many things. I've met incredible change makers and leaders. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for sharing your insights, your experiences, your advices. I would just like to say 3 takeaways in my personal opinion that I've learned. The importance of local action, as all the panelists said, it is very important to make sure that whatever you want to change in the world, you have to start from your own city, from your own country. First of all, actually, from yourself, because if you don't ask yourself the big questions and why you're doing certain things, then maybe we won't be able to make those changes on the international level. Then the importance of finding the community and the support. It is very important to have the people that you can go up to and say, you know what, this is something that I'm really interested in doing. How can I start? How can I get involved? And lastly, inclusivity and representation. I mean, it is very, very important to make sure that when we talk about very big ideas, we are getting as many people on board. And as all of you said, giving someone the seat at the table is not enough. You should also give them access to actually create policy change, because then that translates into the real action. So those were some of the takeaways from my own personal perspective. But thank you again, and I would like to end this incredible session. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now how do I?
You guys did great.